Okay, so, we often hear about new laws and it feels like, well, just headlines. But then something like the one big beautiful bill lands after passing Congress, and you just know there's way more under the surface. You've probably caught the big picture stuff. But digging through the sources, wow, what's really tucked away in these, what, almost 900 pages?
It's genuinely fascinating how comprehensive this thing is. What really stands out is the sheer ambition. People are calling it a mega bill, and honestly, it touches pretty much everything. Your wallet, healthcare, energy policy, even space travel, believe it or not. So our goal today is really to cut through all that noise. We want to uncover those less talked about, but, really impactful pieces, give you the full story.
Yeah, and to do that, we've pulled together quite a stack of sources, lots of different perspectives. We're looking at CNN, AP, BBC, AARP, Politico, CBS, MSNBC, The Guardian, all writing about this around July 3rd, 4th, 2025. So let's dive in. What does this really mean for you? Okay, first, how did this even happen? It wasn't exactly smooth sailing through Congress, was it?
Not at all. It was pretty dramatic. It squeaks through the House, 218 to 214, just yesterday, July 3rd. And that was after an even tighter vote in the Senate. Needed Vice President J.D. Vance to break the tie there.
Wow, a tiebreaker. And it's set to be signed today, July 4th.
That's the expectation, yeah. And looking at the bigger picture, proponents see this as, well, essential. They argue it stops a massive tax increase. That's the phrase they used because a lot of the 2017 tax cuts were about to expire. You had House Budget Chair Jody Arrington calling it the most comprehensive and consequential set of conservative reforms in modern history. Quite a claim.
That's a bold statement.
It is. And remember that 900-page number. It's not just fluff. It means this one bill handles extending those tax cuts, but also deep cuts to programs like Medicaid and food stamps, plus more money for border security and defense. It's all in there.
And the Republicans were definitely celebrating. We saw House Speaker Mike Johnson asking, "You get tired of winning yet?"
hmm
There were even reports they played YMCA after the vote.
Yeah, there was a real sense of victory on their side.
But, I mean, with a bill this huge, this impactful, that celebration definitely comes alongside a whole lot of controversy.
Absolutely. For every cheer on one side, there's very strong pushback from the other. We'll definitely get into that. But you're right, the sheer scope means almost everyone is affected somehow.
Which brings us right to, well, where it hits closest for a lot of us,
Mhm.
our finances. So the bill makes those lower individual tax rates and the bigger standard deductions from 2017 permanent. They were going to expire otherwise.
Yeah.
But then there are these new kind of unique provisions too. What's jumped out at you there?
Well, what's really interesting are these new tax breaks. They're temporary, though, just for 2025 through maybe 2028 or 2029. For tip income. If you work in the service industry, you might be able to deduct up to $25,000 in tips.
25,000. Okay.
Yeah, for qualifying tips. And then there's one for overtime pay, up to $12,500 deduction, or double that for married couples. But there are income limits on that one. You have to check the details.
All right. So these are quite specific, targeting certain workers. What
Yeah.
else? Anything for, say, big purchases?
Actually, yes. Cars. If you buy a car assembled in the U.S., you could deduct up to 10 grand in loan interest. Again, income limits apply. Like a single person making $120,000 might only get to deduct $6,000, for example.
Okay.
And then there's the senior bonus deduction, an extra $6,000 standard deduction for folks 65 and older, provided their income is under $75,000 or $150,000 for couples. It phases out above that. They're sort of pitching this as an alternative to getting rid of taxes on Social Security, which was another idea floating around.
Lots of little details to keep track of there. And it doesn't stop, right? There are broader changes too.
Exactly. The child tax credit gets a permanent boost up to $2,200 per kid from $2,000 now.
Okay, that's permanent.
Yes. And then the SALT deduction state and local taxes, that cap, which hit people hard in high-tax states, it gets quadrupled temporarily from $10,000 up to $40,000.
40,000, that's a big jump.
It is, but temporary again through 2028 or 2030, depending on the House or Senate version. And it also phases out for higher earners.
Right. And businesses, how are they making out?
Businesses get some significant breaks, too. They can immediately write off 100% of what they spend on new equipment and R&D. And that Section 199A deduction for pass-through businesses, that's made permanent.
Okay, pass through. Can you just quickly remind us what that means for, like, small business
That's
owner?
a good question. Yeah, basically, it's a business where the income isn't taxed at the corporate level. It just passes through to the owner's personal tax return. Think
Mhm.
sole proprietors, partnerships, S corp. So this 199A deduction lets them take 20% off that business income on their personal taxes. It's a pretty big deal for many small and medium businesses.
Got it. That helps. So, okay, we've got all these tax changes, permanent ones, temporary ones, business breaks. It brings up the big question. Who really benefits most from all this? Is it spread out or?
Well, that's where the analyses come in. Groups like the Tax Policy Center, the Budget Lab at Yale, they've run the numbers. And what they project is, yes, most households will probably pay less tax than if the old cuts just expired. But the lion's share of the benefit, roughly 60%, goes to the top 20% of earners, people making $217,000 or more. They might see an average cut around $12,500.
12.5. Okay. And the other end?
The lowest income households, say earning $35,000 or less, their average cut might be closer to like 150.
150 versus $12,500. That's quite a difference.
It is. The distribution is definitely skewed towards the top end.
So given those numbers, how do the bill supporters square that? Especially when they talk about preventing a massive tax increase for everyone. What's their angle on the lower income impact?
Right. Well, their main argument is that stopping the 2017 cuts from expiring does help everyone avoid a tax hike across the board. That's the baseline argument. And they frame the specific targeted deductions, like for tips or overtime, as helping particular working groups. Plus, they present the spending cuts, which we'll get to, as necessary fiscal responsibility to balance things out. So it's a narrative combining broad relief, targeted help, and what they see as budget discipline.
Okay, that makes sense. A balancing act, or at least presented as one.
Yeah.
And you mentioned the spending cuts. Let's turn there,
Mm-hmm.
because this is where a lot of the really fierce criticism is coming from. Where are the biggest cuts?
They are significant, yes. Medicaid takes a huge hit. The Senate version alone estimates cuts over $1 trillion.
$1 trillion. Wow.
Yeah. And it comes with major policy changes. New work requirements for many adults, 19 to 64. They need to work, volunteer, go to school, or do job training for 80 hours a month. This even includes parents if their kids are 14 or older.
80 hours a month.
Plus, people on Medicaid will face more frequent checks to make sure they're still eligible, and potentially a new $35 copay for services. The CBO, that's the Congressional Budget Office, they estimate this could cause anywhere from 7.8 to 16 million more people to become uninsured by 2034.
16 million. That's staggering. Hospitals must be concerned.
Deeply concerned, especially rural hospitals. They're warning about potential closures or having to cut back services because of the financial pressure.
Okay. Huge impact on healthcare. What about food assistance? SNAP.
SNAP, or food stamps, also sees big changes. Those work requirements are broadened. They'll now hit older adults 55 to 64. And also veterans, youth aging out of foster care, and people experiencing homelessness groups often previously exempt. And here's a really critical change. States might now have to pay for a portion of the benefits themselves.
Oh, wait. States have to chip in.
Potentially, yes, which could lead to states cutting benefit amounts or maybe even pulling out of the program entirely if they can't afford it. Estimates suggest this could cut benefits by about $100 a month on average for around 600,000 low-income households.
So tighter eligibility, potentially lower benefits. And the Affordable Care Act, Obamacare, any changes there?
Yes, more verification requirements for people getting subsidies. And an end to automatic re-enrollment. Critics worry this complexity could cause millions to lose their coverage or subsidies simply due to paperwork issues.
Mm-hmm.
And there are also changes impacting non-citizens. Limits on eligibility for things like food stamps, Medicaid, ACA subsidies, Medicare, even for some refugees and asylees. Plus, potentially new or higher fees for immigration applications like asylum or work permits.
Okay, these safety net changes are really significant, huge potential impact. But the bill's reach keeps going. Let's pivot to energy, because this looks like a complete U-turn on recent green energy policies, doesn't it?
It absolutely does. It's a pretty dramatic rollback of the clean energy incentives that were a big part of the previous administration's climate agenda under President Biden, specifically those tax credits for electric vehicles. The $7,500 for a new EV, $4,000 for used, they're now set to end much sooner, after September 30th, 2025. They were supposed to run until 2032.
So basically ending next year.
Pretty much, yeah. And it's similar for home energy efficiency credits, things like rooftop solar, heat pumps, efficient windows. Those credits end after December 31st, 2025. And incentives for bigger projects like utility-scale solar and wind farms, those are also being phased out earlier by 2027. It's a really significant withdrawal of federal support for that whole sector.
Wow, a massive policy shift.
Yeah.
And another area causing a lot of anxiety, student loans. Big changes there, too,
Yeah.
right? Affecting millions.
Yes, definitely. The federal student loan system gets a major overhaul. There will be new caps on how much grad students and professional students can borrow. Same for parent PLUS loans. Those are the ones parents take out.
Sound borrowing. Okay.
And fewer ways to repay. It looks like options will be mainly limited to a standard 10-year plan or a new single repayment assistance plan. And maybe most crucially, those deferment options for unemployment or economic hardship, gone. Eliminated.
No more pausing payments if you lose your job.
That appears to be the case under this bill. It really changes the landscape for financing higher education and managing that debt afterwards.
You know, it's just incredible. We've hit taxes, healthcare, energy, student debt, huge areas. But as we were digging through all this material, we found some really surprising, almost like hidden items tucked away in this monster bill, the kind of stuff you'd just never expect. What were some of those?
Yeah, it really does feel like an oddities list sometimes.
Yeah.
Okay, get this. $85 million to move the Space Shuttle Discovery.
The space shuttle. Move it where?
From its current museum spot in Northern Virginia down to the Johnson Space Center in Houston. Apparently a big push from Texas senators.
$85 million for moving a shuttle. Okay, that's one way to use leverage in a big bill, I guess. What else?
Well, sticking with space, commercial launch companies think SpaceX and others, they're going to face new fees. It's phased in, starts small, like 25 cents per pound launched, capped at $30K. But by 2033, it goes up to $1.50 per pound, capped at $200,000 per launch.
Interesting. A new cost for private spaceflight.
And here's one that caught the eye of the gambling world. Professional gamblers, they can now only deduct 90% of their losses against their winnings.
Only 90%. Wait, does that mean?
It could, yeah. Professional poker player Phil Galfond pointed out you could actually end up paying more in tax than you won in a year. A really strange potential outcome.
That is wild. Okay, I also saw something about the Kennedy Center.
You did. $257 million allocated for renovations there, which is, interesting because the same administration cut other arts funding.
Inconsistent, maybe.
Seems that way. And then on gun policy, a really significant change. That $200 tax stamp and all the registration hoops for getting gun silencers or short-barreled rifles, gone. Removed from the National Firearms Act of 1934.
Just removed. That's a major rollback.
Huge rollback, yeah. A big win for gun rights advocates.
It's just amazing the sheer variety here. Wasn't there also a really specific tax grid for, like, one group in one state?
Yes. The whaling captains. Classic example of legislative horse trading. Alaska Senator Lisa Murkowski apparently used her crucial vote to bump up a tax deduction for whaling-related expenses from $10,000 up to $50,000.
For whaling captains in Alaska, you can't make this stuff up.
You really can't. And there's more. A pilot program called Trump Accounts, or sometimes Baby Bonus.
Yeah.
It runs for 3 years, 2025 to 28, gives every baby born in the U.S. a $1,000 government starter investment in an index fund.
$1,000 for every baby.
Yeah, and parents can add up to $5,000 more each year. It's like a national nest egg program, but just a pilot for now. On the flip side, wealthy universities, Harvard, Yale, places with endowments over $2 million per student, they face a new excise tax, up to 8%.
So hitting the big endowments.
Exactly. Then there's $40 million finally set aside for that National Garden of American Heroes project. And importantly, an amendment added $50 billion over 5 years specifically for rural hospitals, likely a nod to the concerns about Medicaid cuts impacting them.
Okay, that's a significant pot of money for rural health.
Yes. Also, a new 1% tax on money transfers sent out of the country, a remittance tax, and a very specific one-year ban on Medicaid payments going to family planning providers that also offer abortions. It explicitly mentions Planned Parenthood.
Wow. Space shuttles, whaling, baby bonds, Planned Parenthood. It's really all in there. It makes you wonder how they keep track of it all. Of all those quirky, surprising things, which one do you think might actually have the most unexpected ripple effect down the line?
That's a tough one. Maybe the baby bonus. Even as a pilot program, introducing a universal government-seated investment account at birth, it's just a fundamentally new kind of federal program. It could have really interesting long-term economic effects for those kids, but also politically it sets a precedent. Could be more significant than it looks right now.
Interesting thought. Okay, so moving from those hidden details back to the big picture, the politics of this. Obviously it passed, but not without a huge fight. Democrats sound absolutely furious.
Unified fury, yeah. You had House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries give that incredibly long speech over 8 hours, right?
Oh, yeah.
Calling the bill a crime scene, an extraordinary assault on healthcare. That really set the tone.
8 hours.
And Democrats across the board are using phrases like trickle-down cruelty, tax giveaway to the rich paid for by the most vulnerable. We heard quotes like Ken Martin saying, "If you are not a billionaire, we don't give a damn about you." Strong stuff. Senator Raphael Warnock called it a dark day, a sellout working people.
So, really strong language. Are they pointing to specific hypocrisies or contradictions?
They are. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, for instance, contrasted the permanent tax cuts for corporations and the wealthy with the temporary nature of breaks for tipped workers or overtime pay. She also raised alarms about increased funding for ICE, suggesting it paves the way for mass deportations far beyond current levels, saying it could make things now look like child's play.
Wow.
And, Democrats have definitely seized on some Republican comments, too, like reports of Mitch McConnell saying people will just get over the Medicaid cuts, or Senator Johnny Ernst's "we all are going to die" comment when asked about health care concerns. Those remarks got a lot of negative attention.
Yeah, you can imagine. But what's also fascinating is the internal Republican side.
Mm-hmm.
Despite the celebrations, it sounds like there was real dissent, and it took some serious arm twisting to get it across the line.
Oh, absolutely. The reports describe President Trump and VP Vortz using pretty intense tactics. Leaned on, cajoled, browbeat were some of the words used on reluctant Republicans. In the end, only 2 House Republicans voted no: Thomas Massie from Kentucky, who often votes against leadership, and Brian Fitzpatrick from Pennsylvania. Fitzpatrick actually said the Senate deepening the Medicaid cuts was the reason he voted against the final version.
So the Senate changes pushed him over the edge.
Seems so. And in the Senate, Lisa Murkowski from Alaska was clearly a key holdout. She managed to get those specific Alaska provisions, like the whaling deduction and a delay on states having to share SNAP costs if they have high error rates. Classic deal-making for a crucial vote.
Right, leverage.
And there were political costs for resisting. Senator Tom Tillis from North Carolina, after opposing parts of the bill, announced he wouldn't run again when Trump promised to back a primary challenger against him. Sends a message.
Yeah, definitely sends a message. Okay, so stepping back from the political battles for a second, what about the country's finances? The national debt. This bill must have major implications there. What do the numbers say?
Big implications. The CBO, the nonpartisan scorekeeper, projects this bill adds $3.3 trillion to the national deficit over the next 10 years.
3.3 trillion?
Yeah.
That's a lot. How do Republicans respond to that?
Well, this is where it gets complicated. They argue it actually reduces deficits, but critics call their method an accounting gimmick.
An accounting gimmick. Okay, break that down. How does that work?
Sure. So the gimmick, as critics call it, is about the baseline they use for comparison. Instead of starting from current law, where the 2017 tax cuts would expire, they create a new baseline that assumes those cuts were already permanent. So when the bill then officially makes them permanent, they can claim it's a spending cut compared to that hypothetical higher baseline, even though compared to reality, it adds trillions to the debt.
Okay, so it depends entirely on your starting point assumption.
Exactly. It's a way to frame the numbers. But regardless of that debate, the bill does also raise the debt ceiling by $5 trillion, which basically just allows the government to borrow the money it needs to pay the bills incurred by this and other laws.
Right, just lets them keep paying the bills.
Yeah.
Okay, and maybe the most interesting, almost philosophical question here is public perception. With a bill this complex, with such conflicting narratives, will people actually understand what's in it? Will they believe the impacts described?
That is such a critical point. There's this phenomenon sometimes called the belief gap. We've seen it before where descriptions of policies sound so, cartoonishly evil or extreme to voters that they dismiss them, even if the descriptions are accurate. And despite how much this bill touches everyday life, polling suggests public awareness of the specifics is actually quite low.
Really? Even with all the noise?
Yeah, people know something big happened, but the details? Not so much. Which is interesting when you see someone like Elon Musk publicly slamming the bill, predicting political suicide for Republicans because it ends the EV tax credits early. It shows the opposition isn't just partisan, it's coming from different, sometimes unexpected corners based on specific impacts. It really begs the question of whether people will grasp the full picture until they feel the effects themselves.
So, wrapping this deep dive up, We've seen this one big beautiful bill is just incredibly complex, incredibly sprawling. It offers significant tax benefits, yeah, but skewed towards the top. And it pays for it partly with deep cuts to safety nets, a reversal on green energy, changes to student loans. It really tries to reshape huge chunks of American policy and life, affecting everyone from the wealthiest down to the most vulnerable. After pulling back the curtain on all this, what's the single biggest takeaway for you?
I think what truly resonates is just the sheer simultaneous ambition. This isn't just tweaking things, it's a fundamental attempt to re engineer core aspects of the economy and the social contract all at once. It's a cohesive, though obviously deeply controversial, vision. And that really leaves us with a big question, doesn't it? In today's world, with so much information flying around, how does a bill this massive, with consequences that are so far reaching but sometimes hidden, how will it actually change the relationship between people and their government? And what are the long term political consequences going to be for both parties, especially as these changes start to bite or benefit people on the ground? It feels like a massive national experiment, and we won't know the full results for years to come.